Distinguished panelists, distinguished participants, good afternoon, uh, good morning, and also it's good evening, namaste. I welcome you all in this session 12, Industrial Policy in the Age of Fourth Industrial Revolution. Well, industrial policy is generally understood as a concerted, focused, conscious efforts on the part of the government to encourage and promote a specific industrial sector with an array of policy tools. However, there have been a lot of debate regarding the efficacy of industrial policy. Regarding the efficacy, let me start by quoting Professor Danny Broderick. Industrial policy is back in the scene after a period of decline in interest and premature prediction of demise. There are many factors that have contributed to renewed interest in industrial policy. In many developing countries, as well as in least developed countries, there has been pushback against the market fundamentalisms typically associated with the Washington Consensus. In these countries, economic growth could not adequately generate employment and quality jobs, and it also could not bring out the required structural transformation in the economy. In addition, many countries experienced premature deindustrialization and also faced middle income trap. Even in developed countries, continuing decline in the employment share of manufacturing and increased competition in the external market have pushed towards re-adoption of industrial policy. And if we look at our recent past, industrial policy has been increasingly used as a response to the crisis. Both advanced and developing countries' government have sought to intervene more strongly in domestic industries after 2008 financial crisis, and more so again in response to the COVID pandemic, to restart our economy and also to build back better. And industrial policy is also increasingly considered an important tool for green economic transition, as well as for strategic autonomy in technology in the context of shifting geopolitical dynamics. Much more importantly, and with long-term implication, interest in industrial policy is being further stimulated by disruptive technological change, such as artificial intelligence, big data analytics, cloud computing, Internet of Things, IoT, advanced robotics, additive manufacturing, you name a few. Or, if you can call it by this fourth industrial revolution. In this session 12, we'll be discussing the South Asian perspective on industrial policy in the context of fourth industrial revolution. And we'll also attempt to explore the possibility of regional cooperation to harness the opportunity brought up by the fourth industrial revolution, as well as to minimize the risk of this and fourth industrial revolutions, particularly for South Asian countries. To discuss these issues, we have eminent experts from South Asia. From India, we have experts from India, we have experts from Bangladesh, we have experts from Pakistan, and we have experts from Sri Lanka. Well, first, let me invite my good friend, Professor Nagesh Kumar. Professor Nagesh is currently director of the Institute of Studies in industrial development, ISID, based in New Delhi. He served UNSCAP as a chief economist, director of macroeconomic policy and development division, and also director of social development division. And he was also head of the South and Southwest Asia office of UNSCAP in New Delhi. He also served as a director general of Delhi-based think tank Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Professor Nagesh, over to you. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Posh, for thinking of me for this very important session and very important theme. I think industrial policy, as you said very rightly, there is a growing interest and sort of a revival of interest in industrial policy all across the world. And especially, I think the theme that you have chosen for this session, that what kind of industrial policy can one use for the industry 4.0. So let me just share a few thoughts on that. First of all, industrial revolution 4.0 is a very important, new sort of wave of new set of economic activities, value-adding activities that have a huge potential. It is going to be a huge disruptor, if you like. But there are also positive, and creative opportunities that can be very helpful for developing countries. So what I would like to say is that Industry 4.0 means different things to different people or different countries. And industrialized countries are exploiting the potential of these new approaches, new technologies such as artificial intelligence or machine learning for displacing labor primarily. So driverless cars, if you have heard of, and then automation in different industries to substitute labor. And that means they can, reshore or onshore the number of production and productive activities that were phased out or outsourced to developing countries in earlier times. So there is a risk of, the offshore activities going back from developing countries to developed countries, including garment making, for instance. So that is one side of it. But then for developing countries, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, and all of these, new technologies also can be seen as ways and means of bringing societal transformation. And over the past few years, a variety and of new applications have come up, which can be, which can be suggestive of the potential of these technologies for development. So just to give you an idea, I mean, in India, of course, we have heard of for COVID management, pandemic management, India used this Arogya Setu, app, which was, very helpful to manage the spread, or contain the spread of the pandemic. But it was not only that, we also went ahead to have COVID to manage the vaccination drive in the country. And so all of these applications were based on artificial intelligence and digital technologies. There is also the universal identification or digital ID for every Indian. And so 1.2, billion people have got a digital identity by now. Then there is a drive to support the digitization of land records, which is a big problem in India and also in other South Asian countries. So you can go on and on. I mean, financial inclusion is a very important initiative which can be driven through the digital technologies, the e-markets, the direct benefit transfers. So government support to the vulnerable and poor people reaching directly to their bank accounts through this digital technology. So there are, and in agriculture and food security related issues, smart agriculture through applications of these technologies can help in making agriculture and farmers much more productive. So there are thousands and thousands of societal transformation opportunities coming out of the digital revolution. Now, the issue is, and India is actually talking of $1 trillion digital economy by 2025. So now coming to the industrial policy elements, or what kind of policy measures can be adopted to really harness and leverage the digital technologies or digital revolution for societal transformation. I think the crux of the digital revolution can be summed up by three words, as someone said: skill, skill, skill. So we can't overemphasize the importance and criticality of skills for harnessing the fruits of this technology. And in that context, I think the very major effort to develop skills that can leverage these technologies is very important. And so then India has this digital skill India program, and so that is one. Then ecosystem for startups, because this technology is so highly skill oriented. Young people who are tech savvy, if they have ideas, they should be facilitated to experiment it. And for that, startups, and they are major drivers of these technologies and specific applications, societal applications. And so we need to have an enabling framework or an ecosystem that helps these young people with ideas to implement their ideas. And so incubators around the institutions of higher education. So India has all of these IITs equipped with incubator systems. So all IITs have an incubator attached to them, which helps in breeding these new entrepreneurs. And you might have read about how many unicorns are already minted in India in the last few years. It's this amazing speed at which they are bringing new ideas to the marketplace, and they need to be facilitated. So this is another element of the industrial policy for IR 4.0. The financing and the access to venture capital, adequate venture capital, is another important element. And there, of course, government has this Mudra scheme, under which loan is sanctioned to these entrepreneurs in 1 hour. But more than that, I think the private sector and private equity players are bringing billions of dollars and pumping into these unicorns or these startups. So the enabling framework and the availability of adequate venture capital, risk capital, which people are able to provide to these young people with ideas. So I think that is another very critical thing. And then managing the downside is equally important. Digital economy has given rise to these new platforms, the gig economy like Uber and Ola and their workers. So this is a new model of employment and labor engagement which has been practiced. So these people who are working in this gig economy, so to say, are highly vulnerable because this is a very different kind of a ball game. It is not a proper employment. They are partners or owners and all that of their vehicles they drive. So they are highly vulnerable to they don't have any cover for the social protection. So I think new ways and means of providing social protection, enhancing the social protection which can take care of these new breed of workers, I think that is very critical for harnessing fruits of this revolution without and managing the downside risk. So that is where I think I would like to stop because my 10 minutes have just come to an end. But I think another thing I want to just close by saying that regional cooperation among South Asian countries in learning from each other is going to be very critical because each country has its own new ways of solving problems and using technology, and learning from each other, scaling it up would be extremely rewarding. I will stop here. Thank you very much, Posh.
You are on mute, Dr. Posh.
Okay, thank you to Nagesh for bringing out, very pertinent issues on the table. Well, this digital, transformation, or what we call, Industry 4.0, it has bring out, its major contribution, I think, is the fall in the cost. Or perhaps, some costs are gone to zero. For example, there is fall in the cost, like, in cost, search cost, it's almost nil. Replication cost, it's almost nil. Transportation cost, it has reduced. Tracking cost, it's almost nil. Verification cost, it's almost nil. So because of these, cost, reduction in cost, it has contributed in societal transformations, which Professor Nagesh has rightly highlighted over here. And also, it has contributed in this, production process also, and there is near date of outsourcing, and that is a great risk for developing countries. And for this, we need to reskill, our human resources. That is very pertinent issues raised by the Professor Nagesh. And also, much more importantly, he highlighted the need for regional cooperations, for harnessing the benefit of these fourth industrial revolutions. Okay, with this, now I invite my good friend from Bangladesh, Dr. Famida Khatun. She is currently the Executive Director of Center for Policy Dialogue, think tank, prominent think tank in Bangladesh, as well as in South Asia. She has worked in various areas of Bangladesh and South Asian economies, such as macroeconomic policy, industrial policy, trade policy, climate change, and environmental issues, as well as on issues of sustainable development goals. Dr. Famida, now you have the floor, and again, you have 10 minutes. Over to you, Famida. Dr. Famida?
Dr. Posh, if we can move on to Dr. Sajid.
Okay, sure. Okay, maybe Famida would join us later. Then let me invite Dr. Sajid Amin. Dr. Amin is a senior research fellow at Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI, Pakistan. Dr. Sajid, over to you. And you have also under 10 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Posh, and hello to everyone. And very interesting introduction from the Dr. Posh and a very compelling presentation from Dr. Nagesh. You know, it's very difficult to add much when it comes to you after Dr. Nagesh and Dr. Posh's comments. But we keep learning from their such an excellent work on regional trade and overall trade and economy. But let me just pick on 3 points that have been coming within the introduction of Dr. Posh and comments from the Dr. Nagesh. The one is the premature deindustrialization, particularly in South Asia. And it has very serious implications for industrial policy. I mean, if I can stick to the topic, while it has a very long, wide range implications. But in terms of industrial policy in the South Asia, and you know, the Pakistan was one of the, I mean, not top for the good, but top for the bad, that we had the one of the serious premature deindustrialization in Pakistan. If you see the data from Pakistan, we jumped from agriculture sector directly to the services sector without consolidating the manufacturing sector actually. And it has a long range of implications ranging from the kind of jobs being produced. You know, in Pakistan, there was a huge demand for elementary skills only. The demand for the economy was not producing demand for middle skills or the high skills. The services sector itself has been having a low productivity as it derives its productivity from the manufacturing sector, which witnessed a premature deindustrialization. But in terms of industrial policy, it has actually the industrial policy became a residual policy in the face of the deindustrialization. And this is what Dr. Posh also started, that the definition of industrial policy became very narrow. Because we don't have a very active manufacturing sector. So it became a residual policy on the sideline, which just was aimed to protecting through tariffs, through other duties to some of the industry in the name of infant industry or in the name of export promotions. So that was actually the key purpose or the definition that prevailed in terms of industrial policy in Pakistan. It was de-linked from the technology adaptation, the innovation, and many other things. So this was the, I think, a very serious implication of premature deindustrialization that came on industrial policy. The idea, I mean, the industrial policy again was very de-linked from the other macroeconomic policy. For example, I'll just give you one example of Pakistan, that when it was aiming to produce or promote exports to $36 billion a year, at the same time, the central policy of the government was to keep the rupee artificially overvalued. That was taxing the exports at the same time, actually, because the industrial policy was totally de-linked from what the other points were happening. In this context, I think the one fear that I have when it comes to re-innovating industrial policy in the Industrial Revolution 4.0, and I've been having discussions around here, I think while there is now an improved understanding that industrial policy has a broad range, multidimensionality, it has multifacets. It's not only protecting some sectors or the only industry, its implications and interlinkages has a wide range from innovation policies, from the technology adaptation policies, from the gender inclusiveness policy that Dr. Nagesh has very rightly pointed out. But I think still the central focus remains on industrial policy for employment. That remains the guiding principle. I think this needs to go if we have to align our industrial policy with the Industrial Revolution 4. The central focus, I think, needs to go on the industrial policy for innovation and technological development, for productivity improvement and the competitiveness improvement. So I think this fundamental shift in thinking before we go for on the application side is required. I think the industrial policy for employment, the period has gone, actually. That train we have missed, particularly in Pakistan. I think it's now to think the industrial policy for innovation, competitiveness, and the productivity growth. Towards coming to closer on the side, I think the regional cooperation opportunity that is very critical that Dr. Nagesh closed with. I'll just build on that. I think there are two key opportunities coming from both COVID-19 and the IR 4.0 that I think are benefiting. They can improve the regional cooperation. The one is that in the COVID-19, we have seen that the use of technology and other digitalization or the digitization, it has made services more tradable than the goods actually. And the many barriers that regional cooperation in South Asia has been facing, for example, in terms of cross-border issues, mobility issues, and many other issues, I think they will be to a certain degree reduced when services are more tradable than the goods actually. And this is the good part that is coming from the COVID-19. Another point that I think still to see, but I think that maybe another a catalyzing factor to the regional cooperation, putting us more on the regional cooperation, is that one of the key barrier in terms of intra-regional trade in South Asia was the competing economic and production structures. I mean, we were producing almost similar goods and similar stuffs. But now if we see with IF 4.0, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan may have a different specialization, different productions. For example, India may be moving higher on the ladder in terms of high-tech products, followed by Bangladesh and somewhere in India. So these, I think the weakening of these competing structures can also be a final catalyzing towards the improved regional cooperation. But just closing on the next 2 minutes, I hope I have 2 minutes. To benefit from this opportunity, I think there are a couple of requirements that we need to go. The one is that industrial policy needs to go beyond protecting and subsidizing some sectors, and it has to focus on innovation and productivity. Attracting FDI must be a central focus of industrial policy. It has not been, particularly in Pakistan. I mean, we have been attracting only strategic FDI. The efficiency seeking FDI was not coming to Pakistan as it was coming to other South Asian countries. Skills development will be very critical, as Dr. Nagesh has said. And I think one point that in South Asia needs to be focused, that skills development needs to go out of social policy. I mean, it has been skills development has been under the social policy for some livelihoods, but we need to shift now skills development for productivity and competitiveness. And a central focus would be. Finally, I think the gender sensitive industrial policy will be very critical, because we have witnessed from COVID-19 and from IF 4.0 also that the impact is very skewed by nature of jobs, by occupations, by region, by residence, and by the gender. And India puts a very excellent example on this one. If you see the recent decline in female labor force participation that is happening in India, that is one of the key reflect on that, how there can be, if there is a development both in terms of digitization, innovation, new skills are developed, new industry is happening, the impact will be sort of skewed against the females population, those who are working in informal sector, elementary skills. I think it should be a very gender sensitive industrial policy which is focused on innovation and competitiveness. I hope I finished in my 10 minutes. I'm up. Thank you so much.
Dr. Posh, you are on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Sajid, for highlighting the issues of premature digitalizations. I mean, in developing countries rather than or in South Asian countries, and also importance of employment generation through industrial policy. Much importantly, I mean, you highlighted the need for moving away from traditional industrial policy to reorienting industrial policy towards innovation, capability enhancement, and productivity growth. And we also highlighted, I mean, quite interestingly, that I mean, new economic structure, but particularly with regard to digital economy, South Asian economies has become much more complementary to each other rather than competitive. The trade structure and production structure previously in goods that used to be competitive, but now there are a lot of complementarity to each other. So there is a lot of potential for regional cooperations. These are very quite interesting points you raised over here. Thank you again. Now I invite,
Thank you.
if Dr. Famida is there, then let me invite Famida. If not, then let me invite Asanka Ujasinghe. He's a research economist at the Institute of Policy Studies, IPS, Sri Lanka. And he has been working, doing research in areas of international trade, labor, as well as in health economics. Dr. Ujasinghe, you have the floor. Again, you have 10 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Posh. Let me share the screen. I have some slides. It is easy for me to organize my thought. I'm Asanka Ujasinghe. I'm from Institute of Policy Studies, Sri Lanka. I will talk about this global development of automation, especially, which is relevant for this industrial policy and future of the global value chain participation, which is a norm in the production structure of the current world. And then I will talk about Sri Lanka's exports in fourth industrial revolution era, and to identify what are the exports that has potential to benefit from fourth industrial revolution, and also the products that will be affected by this fourth industrial revolution. Finally, Sri Lanka's readiness in fourth industrial revolution, especially to build resilience and to benefit from this current development. It will be followed by a discussion of the policies. Well, this fourth industrial revolution is about artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, big data, and Internet of Things. I'm more focusing on automation and using of these robotics, 3D printing, and those technologies to produce goods. We have opportunities as well as challenges. Opportunities are gaining efficiency and productivity, decreasing trade costs, and effective supply chains. As a result of that, as countries, we can achieve higher economic growth. But the problem is inequity, mainly because these technologies need huge capital investment. The question is whether countries like us are being in a position to do such investment. Other thing is the labor market effects, like who will be affected by this industrial revolution. And there is a possibility for less offshoring, which is a concern for countries like us, and of course reshoring, developed countries, because reshoring and this automation are kind of substitutes. Instead of seeking for low cost, low factor prices, they can go for automation and produce products in their own countries. Automation's labor market effects are actually very well documented in the developed countries. We have seen adverse labor market effects like negative effects on participation rate as well as the wages. And reshoring may reduce the developing countries' ability to capitalize on low factor prices, especially low wage costs. It is if we focus on industries like textiles, we are capitalizing on these low factor prices. And the question is, are automation and offshoring are substitutes? Actually, we don't have much evidence to show that. There is this recent paper by Paul Landgras. The connection is less clear cut. And also, as Andras noted, automation may increase the demand for raw materials from developing countries. So my point is, we should not make design our industrial policy with the prior assumption that, okay, we are going for decoupling from GVCs. We don't have much evidence for that. Sri Lanka's exports are, we have traditional agricultural exports. Actually, there is less chance that they are affected. And automation in developed countries may increase demand for raw materials. We produce rubber, graphite, and other minerals. Even in the 3D printing, they need the raw materials. So countries like us can provide export raw materials for those industries. A most important sector which will be affecting and which has the potential to benefit from fourth industrial revolution is textiles. In Sri Lanka, we are losing a lot because of the higher wage cost. This is a way out for us if we use automation to reduce costs. However, automation will depend on factor prices, trade cost, skilled labor, and the nature of demand. In textile sector, there is this heavy demand and demand fluctuation for certain products, and the traditional textile exports do not see this fluctuation in demand. Products with fluctuating demand prone to automation actually, and it is beneficial. The other thing is this HS chapter 85, we have a growing industry in this electric and electrical equipment. You can see from this chart, the export from Sri Lanka is increasing, is on an increasing trend, and the contribution to the overall export basket is also increasing. So these are products the US is trying to realign their supply chain. There is a worry that whether they will produce them in their country. That way, that will affect our future expansions. Another thing is that there is an opportunity if they move supply chains away from China and other countries. We have a chance for that. The overall direction of the impact of this fourth industrial revolution on exports is not clear cut. However, there may be an effect on our diversification moves, diversification from these less complex products to more complex products. Sri Lanka's strategy should be, I think, we need to prepare labor force and digital infrastructure to benefit from fourth industrial revolution, and of course to increase the resilience. As I said, high labor cost can be avoided by automation. However, overall, in the Asian countries as well as in Sri Lanka, we don't see much offshoring in, much automation in this area because of capital requirement is really high. The other thing is that in textile sector, sewing needs manipulation of complex motions. They need advanced sew bots that use cameras, mapping technologies, artificial intelligence, and complex algorithms. So the Sri Lanka needs to develop skills of the labor force. When we compare of the technological readiness, we need to increase our digital preparedness, and we need to improve capacity to stimulate innovation. And we need to build an economic system that is complementary to benefit from fourth industrial revolution. There is this recent 2019 State of the Economy report of IPS. It reports that Sri Lanka's ICT innovation and capability is not much satisfactory actually. If you look at the internet usage of Sri Lanka, it is low compared to the other countries in the region, especially in the region means in the Asian countries who are the competitors of Sri Lanka. So we have opportunities. I feel like my screen is frozen actually. I don't know. Anyway, I will wrap up. The idea is we should not take this development of fourth industrial revolution technologies as a decoupling from global value chains. Instead of that, we need to harness our comparative advantage and Sri Lanka's high human development record. We need to invest on the digital infrastructure. Actually, in the recent budget also, there is a suggestion to increase this internet connectivity. Those are the steps Sri Lanka need to take to benefit from these developments of automation and improvement in the technology. I stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Ashanka, for your excellent presentations with the supportive PowerPoints. Now, again, but I'm not sure whether Dr. Famida has joined us or says it to join. Dr. Famida, are you there? If not, then I take permissions to start this question answer session. Well, we have, I mean, a few questions in the chat box. First, I mean, there is one question specifically directed to Professor Nagesh Kumar. And the question is,
You're
You
on
are
mute.
muted, Posh. You are muted. Can't hear you, Posh.
that is the, I mean, questions directed to you, Professor Nagesh. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I couldn't hear you because you are muted, Posh. But I think
sorry. Okay.
So, what is the question you are referring to?
Okay, just a minute.
Access to data?
Yeah, that's basically related to data poverty trap, and
Okay.
how to escape that data poverty trap, and how India is taking initiative to address that data poverty trap. That's the question time for you. Over to you.
Right. Yes, I think it's a very important question. And digital revolution is, of course, built on the basis of big data. And big data means you need to have access and ownership of data. And so in that context, there is a lot of work needs to be done. And so Government of India is trying to bring, some regulations to have, the data protection and all that and access to it. But this is something of a work in progress. And it needs to be, really taken up with the big tech companies, collectively and individually by developing country governments, because without the access to your data and protection of that, it would remain, something of an unfinished task. The, exploitation of the full potential of the digital revolution would not be possible without data. So I fully agree with you, and there has been this Gopala Krishnan committee report, which has pointed to number of measures to be taken in that context. And so, so this is something very important, and it needs to be taken up, and it's a work in progress. So That's what I will say. I see another question about in the chat box, and if I have your permission, post to address that.
Sure, please.
Yeah, this is about potential of green industrialization in South Asia. And I think this is, again, a very important question. And I believe that South Asia has tremendous opportunities of green industrialization, not only in terms of clean energy transformation, which is happening, like countries exploiting their hydropower resources. Now, Nepal itself is also exploiting the hydropower resources. Bhutan has been doing that for many years, and India has this heavy emphasis on solar power, and it is not only exploiting the solar potential of its own, but it is also facilitating or supporting and promoting solar power or solar energy transformation through International Solar Alliance, under which countries are kind of helping each other with capacity building for exploiting the potential of solar energy. And then wind potential is again a very big one. So India has some very ambitious targets to harness the clean energy of 460 gigawatts kind of, target by 2025 or so. And this is going to be of central importance, critical importance for our India's net zero kind of commitments to be fulfilled. But besides this, I think there are many other opportunities of green industrialization. For instance, compact, electric vehicles, the battery making, the two-wheelers driven by electric energy. So there are many industries, green hydrogen, for instance, as a new source of clean energy. So there are many opportunities of green industrialization developing and surfacing, which need to be harnessed through appropriate policies, industrial policies, and incentive system to facilitate transition and exploitation of these opportunities. Over to you, Paul.
So thank you, Professor Nagesh. Well, I mean, that questions, and particularly data poverty questions, that was directed. So sorry, that green economy issues, that was directed to all the panelists. So maybe if other panelists, Dr. Ashanka and Dr. Ajay, if you are interested, I mean, to respond these questions, then you have the floor.
Well, thank you. I think this is very pertinent questions.
Yeah, Dr. Sajid, over to you.
Thank you. I think it's a very pertinent question, and Dr. Nagesh has covered in context of India, it's very well. But just on a broader context, in terms of South Asia and even in the developing countries context, I think the COVID-19 has also provided a window of opportunity. While we have suffered much from the COVID-19, but it has opened many windows of opportunities. One of them is the green recovery. How your fiscal stimulus aligned towards green recovery from the COVID-19. So I think the appetite and the kind of the considerations for a green recovery, green industrialization is a part of that, is much better or much improved compared to the pre-COVID context. But one thing I think where we need to put more focus on, if we have to have really a green industrialization or green recovery, right now I think the debate is more focused on putting it as a benevolence for conserving the environment or the nature. Actually, whenever there is a case for green investments or the green recovery, the broader argument is the environmental friendly. I think we need a bit shift on this one, and it has a very strong economic case. Actually, I mean, investing in green energy, in renewable energy, for example, there is evidence coming that if you invest $1 in fossil fuels or the conventional traditional energy sources, you could create one job actually. But if you invest $1 in green energy, renewable energy, you produce 7.4 jobs. So it's roughly 8 times higher. So I think to convince the investors, those who actually invest, public sector and the private sector, we need a very strong economic case building. And for this, I think one thing that needs to be done in South Asia and many developing countries is reducing the risks of green investments. Because the kind of requirement is that huge. For example, in Pakistan, if only you have to have a green transportation, you need roughly $4 billion a year. And that is roughly 75% of the IMF program that we are having in the 3 years. So that is the huge amountments required. So for that, I think the role of private sector will be critical, and that will require a very kind of multi-dimensional strategy with the green bonds, the social bonds, the green impact bonds. And for that, we need to have an economic case instead of making the broader argument that this is environmental friendly. An investor needs a number on his investment that what will be the return. Government needs a number on it that what we will be gaining from that. So I think that was my main argument in terms of the green infrastructure. And just to close on this one, that we will have to rethink. I mean, green recovery is not only the green energy. Whenever the discussion comes, it is only the green energy focused. I think it needs a broader context where you need green skills, green industry, and many other things. So it has to be a very comprehensive policy, which is integrated into mainstream economic policy. But I'm calling it is green in all or all in green recovery. It needs to be central at the mainstream economic policy instead of taking it as a residual benevolence of the governments to invest in environment friendly projects. It has to have a very strong economic case. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sajid. Dr. Shankar, would you like to
Hi, Dr.
respond to this
Persh.
question?
Yes, I agree that there is a potential for green industrialization. Our experience in Sri Lanka is that first our energy sector was actually hydropower dominated this sector, but later due to our hydrological resources were exhausted, then we moved to coal, and after that we are seeing this new trend, especially solar power and the windmills. We are seeing such investments, but the problem is we need to be aware there is a trade-off. Our cost of production can go up. It is a concern. We need to be competitive in the world market. The other thing is there should be a huge investment. We don't have much resources, but we have seen that there is interest from the countries like European Union for green investment. So that investment promotion should be an imperative part of this green industrialization in a country like ours. Other thing is we need to make sure there is a plan, a long-term plan, where there should not be sudden moves for this kind of thing, as productivity can be affected by ill-planned moves for this green industrialization. That's my view, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shankar. Well, there is one questions with regard to ongoing negotiation in WTO regarding on e-commerce, and also that negotiation under joint statement initiative. And particularly, I mean, the question is how the interest of developing countries, particularly through special and differential S&D treatment, SDT, special and differential treatment, can be protected on the ongoing negotiations, particularly in this joint JSI. I mean, if you are aware of this, I mean, initiative and ongoing negotiations, okay, I just open, I mean, floor for you, panelists. Okay, then it's let me put it this way. I mean, here the interest. I mean, here for this joint initiative, I mean, concluding this e-commerce, developing countries, and particularly India took the lead. India and South Africa, I mean, took the lead. I mean, to have this to address the specific interest of developing countries and ongoing. I mean, if you look at the ongoing negotiations, I mean, they have already submitted that proposals. I mean, just to continue the negotiation and also continue that moratorium, particularly with regard to tariff. Again, coming to JSI, I mean, that they try to liberalize this, I mean, e-commerce in larger scale. So what I think is, I mean, there are few issues that has to be addressed in this JSI and also through this special and differential treatment. And particularly the first one is developing countries and least developed countries should be provided and some sort of regulatory space, particularly in regulating this, I mean, digital companies. I mean, here in digital economy, the first mover advantage is quite large. And first mover takes all advantage, all gains, takes all. So there is the risk of market concentration. And here the traditional anti-competitive, antitrust policy or competition policy may not be applicable here. So at the national levels, I mean, there has to be flexibility and to be regulatory space, I mean, to control abuse of market power by big, I mean, this e-commerce or digital companies. That is another area, I mean, we can have in our special treatment. Another is regarding, I mean, data protections or localization. I mean, I would say selective localization of data. There has to be that kind of a space. I mean, if some country wants to open every data, okay, that's fine. If some country wants to, I mean, protect their data and you want to have legislations, I mean, to have data at the local, I mean, national domestic territory, then there should be that kind of flexibility. And another could be, I mean, it should provide, I mean, some ease for technology transfer to developing countries. That could be another component in the SDT. And fourth one would be the protection of revenue loss, and particularly developing countries. I mean, if you look at the revenue structure of developing countries, you find and contributions of international trade-based taxes quite high, and particularly in our case, it's about it's between 50 to 60%. So we need to protect, I mean, to protect our revenue. I mean, if we are going to lose, I mean, it's through e-commerce. That is another issue. And much more important is the policy space and the issues of policy space, and also the need for technical assistance, particularly with regard to research and development, with regard to skill development, with regard to infrastructure development. I mean, that kind of issue could be addressed, I mean, through special and different treatment in ongoing e-commerce negotiations. Okay, this is my response to that questions, and I'm quite interested. I mean, still, I think we have another, I mean, 5-7 minutes. I just want to put, I mean, one questions, and particularly to Dr. Sajid. I mean, I just wanted to know what are the initiative, I mean, Pakistani government is taking, I mean, with regard to the digital economy. And I mean, are there any challenges, I mean, in promoting or in integrating traditional economy into digital economy? I'll be interested, I mean, to hear you, Dr. Sajid.
Thank you, Dr. Posh. But I'll just add one point to before I come to this question on the proposals that you have been giving for kind of giving a space to the developing countries. And it's a very right question. I mean, there is no best universal uniform industrial policy when it comes to it will vary region to region, country to country. The proposals, I mean, really good proposals, but the one central question that comes to mind is why would the countries, those who can benefit from the first move, will give this space to the developing countries? It has not been happening actually. If you see if the past is an evidence, it's not been happening. So one thing that we have been proposing at STP, I mean in Pakistan, we call it charter of economy. That there should be a minimum economic common agenda that every party in the country agrees to. I think one way to take this space at regional forums or the global forums is that there should be a common agenda that is agreed by the regional countries or by the developing nations or whatever it is. You can be from the south to regional level. That this is the minimum agenda that we need to agree on, and then push it jointly, because only then you can get that space. Otherwise, the incentive to first move, they will not be giving it very easily. The only catalyzing point in this can be that one key lesson from COVID-19 is that you improve when you have a shared recovery. For example, if there is only one country left which has a prevalence of coronavirus or the COVID-19, it can disturb across the world through the transmissions. So this has given a lesson that you are better off if you share it. So I think if you I mean, there was debt swaps available, debt concessions available. They were not benevolences actually. They have a serious economic considerations. For a developed country, it is much better to give some $1 billion instead of closing the borders if it transmits back to the virus and it goes to lockdown. So similarly, I think we have to have a charter of a kind of economy at a regional level, and then must push together to gain this space. Otherwise, I don't think this space will be available. Coming to your question on Pakistan in terms of digitalization, I think the present government has been much considerate of that digitization is the future actually. So one of, I mean, if in Pakistan, the SDPI has worked very closely with the UNESCAP, and we have proposed if recovery which has three key components. The one is the inclusive recovery. The other is the green recovery, but same the time it is the forward-looking recovery. And this is where the investments in digitalization, and ICT becomes very central. So there has been initiatives at the Prime Minister level office, at the government office, they have been there. But one of the key challenges that Pakistan is facing, that is the overwhelming informality of the economy. I mean, roughly, there are very small firms. If you see the total industry, I mean, the total firms in Pakistan, 84% of them are SMEs. And almost 90% of them are the informal sector. So there are awareness issues, there are capacity issues, there are finance issues. For example, the access to finance. And this is one question that I also I came across in the chat box. One of the critical, I think, towards a kind of investing in digital, the digitalization will benefit you only if it is the across the board. If you can having some pockets of digitalization in some urban areas or metropolitans, you cannot benefit at that level, because you have to integrate your value chains into this one. So one of the key, for example, the problem is the financing constraints. The total credit to private sector, it's only 6% goes to 90% SMEs. I mean, if the total private credit is rupees 100, only 6 rupees goes to the SMEs. That needs to be done, and that was the question in this one. And I think one way that government can do, and we did it in when we were having a fiscal stimulus, the risk pooling funds are being established. For example, the government has established a 30 and has been pushing or motivating to the central, I mean, the commercial banks, that you do lend it to the SMEs, and if there are defaults, we can share 50% or 70% of the defaults. I think that can be the immediate short-term solution, because the problems with the SMEs and with this are very rooted structural problems. So there is no magic bullet in the very short run. But two things can be done. One side on the risk pooling funds, and at the same time, central bank can put it in mandatory financing to SMEs. We did it in when we were designing a fiscal stimulus that commercial banks has to give 7% of its total lending to the SMEs. This can also be done with the green recovery or the green investment, but there are no clear solutions on this one, to be very honest. But on ICT, there is a consideration. Challenges are huge, but the government is working on that. Even in don't have a good internet connections, so leave across the border digitization.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sajid. Well, I agree with you. I mean, there is no reason to believe that the first mover would share the benefits. But here we can dilute the benefits of first mover through regional cooperations. So here my questions is to Professor Nagesh. I mean, what are the areas, I mean, we can cooperate regionally, I mean, in South Asia with regard to, I mean, fourth industrial revolutions? Over to you, Nagesh.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Posh. I think this idea which Sajid has raised about this common agenda, to agree, which is agreed to, and around that you come around. I think there is now a common agenda in SDGs, which has been signed up by 193 leaders. So that should be the basis of cooperation. And that covers practically everything which will help in inclusive and sustainable development. And it is of great interest to South Asian countries in particular, because we have lagged behind in economic, inclusive and sustainable development. And this is our chance, our opportunity to really correct the wrongs of the past. I also wanted to take up two other questions on the chat box. One is about this analytical support to developing countries in WTO negotiations. This is something which surfaces again and again because developing countries at large lack analytical capacities to engage in the trade negotiations with proper information and evidence. And I think there the role of strong think tanks with strong analytical inputs in certain countries like in South Asia, SOTI, or India or Pakistan, SDPI and IPS, and South Center, the developing countries organization. So their role becomes extremely important to put on the table the importance and criticality of policy space for developing countries, because without that, they can't really leverage industrial policy and foster their industrial economies and higher value adding activities, moving away from low value adding activities or what is called as structural transformation. So policy space, is critical, and to revive or to extract the policy space and recover the policy space lost in the Uruguay round, you need strong analytical foundations and strong narrative to be built around. So I agree on that. The second point which was raised in the chat box is about the green industry, whether they will get, the smaller players will get the access to finance. I think this is again a very important point, and this needs to be ensured. And I see, at least I can talk about India, that many smaller startups are coming up with big ambitions, and they are able to come up because the money is available. And so, for instance, in the two-wheeler electric mobility two-wheeler space, some completely unknown companies have come into play, and so obviously they are facilitated somehow either by private equity or government organizations to give them required funds, and that's how they are able to come up. Even in rocketry, I mean, there is yesterday I happened to be reading about a startup which is developing rocket cryogenic engines, and it's a startup, just a few engineers coming together, setting up the shop and developing an engine. So I think the importance of having an ecosystem which caters to requirements of all startups, small, big, and all that, it cannot be overemphasized. And so our ecosystem should be enabler, inclusive, and fostering the smaller players in the game. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nagesh. I think, I mean, we have just exhausted, I mean, our time. So I think, I mean, I'm going to close the sessions, and I thank all the panelists and participants for making this session very interesting, productive, and lively. I request, I mean, all the participants to give big hand to our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Posh.
Dr. Posh.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.